Hi, everybody out there. Well, tonight's topic is the looming rate increase again from the Federal Reserve interest rate hike. It could be as much as a full percentage point. And with us to discuss that is our financial expert, Mark Collingsworth of Vera Global Wealth Management, and also Rack of the Rack Attack Gamer YouTube channel, who's also kept abreast of these financial developments. Now, my question is, with the Federal Reserve, again, raising interest rates or lowering interest rates to control the economy, and right now the big point of contention is the inflation. My question is, overall, has it done more harm than good? And what is the alternative if we don't have a Federal Reserve? Now, Mark, again, you're well versed in this, and you maintain that the Fed has done more harm than good over the years. Tell us why.
When the Federal Reserve first came about in 1913 under Woodrow Wilson, we've had, the Great Depression, we've had the 87 stock market crash, we've had the 2008. I mean, the list of economic disasters. I mean, look at the inflation rate of the 1970s. And the Federal Reserve, one of their jobs is supposed to be to control the stock market volatility so there's not stock market crashes. And more importantly, they're supposed to control inflation. Well,
Right.
If their job is to control inflation, I mean, everyone remembers that you could go, you probably heard your grandparents talk about, they could go to the movies and you could basically, for 15 cents, you could get a minutes to the movie, buy a Coke and a bag of popcorn for 15 cents. Today, you do that same thing. You're paying $35 to $40 for the movies. The inflation rate has skyrocketed since 1913. And that's supposed to be one of the main focuses that the Fed is supposed to control is inflation.
But again, my question would it be any better without the Federal Reserve when the banks are in control of the economy? Are they going to do any better for the American public or just for themselves?
Well, as always, they're going to do what's best for themselves. But if the Federal Reserve is not in existence, it's kind of like, the Wizard of Oz movie. Someone's behind the curtain pulling all the strings, and that's what the Federal Reserve is. If you get rid of the Federal Reserve, you at least remove the curtain to at least get a better idea of what people are doing if it gets turned over to the public.
Mark, by the way, on that Wizard of Oz reference, how did the Wizard of Oz get found?
A little dog grabbed the curtain and pulled it back.
No. How did anybody get there?
I don't know. You tell me, Rack.
They had to follow what?
Yellow Brick Road.
That's another good. Yes, the Wizard of Oz. The reason why I mentioned that, and Rack knows exactly where I'm about to go with this. The Wizard of Oz book was actually a secret coded book to actually explain how the Federal Reserve actually operated. If you read the book Animal Farm, Animal Farm actually talks about the rise of Stalin and Hitler and all that stuff by using animal references. The Wizard of Oz is actually the same thing. Everything in the Wizard of Oz is actually a reference to the economy. The Tin Man actually represents the industrial power of the U.S. economy. The line actually represents, I forget the senator, he actually was a senator that tried very hard to end the Federal Reserve, but couldn't because he couldn't get enough courage together. The scarecrow represented the American farmer, and Dorothy represented the innocence of America that they didn't really know what they were getting into. The Yellow Brick Road, that gets you to the Oz, which is and in the original book, it wasn't red slippers, it was actually silver slippers because that's another base metal used for currency. The Wicked Witch of the East actually represented the Eastern banking system that collapsed. When the housing market collapsed in 1908, it was actually the Eastern banks got crushed by the housing market collapsing. Wicked Witch of the East had a house fall on her in the Wizard of Oz. So you can kind of see how all the story goes.
Now, is this
And the yellow brick
theory or is this fact?
What this is actually the guy that wrote the Wizard of Oz. This is actually, he came out years later and actually talked about that's what the representation of the characters are in the book.
And the Yellow Brick Road was gold bricks that lead you to the Federal Reserve.
Oh, that adds a new dimension to this. A childhood movie that a lot of people still cherish. So a hidden message there. But again, getting back to my original question, Mark, why are you convinced that the banks would, just in a free for all, the way I see it, the Wild West, why would that be better for the economy in terms of regulating the ups and downs than what the Federal Reserve is doing, as bad as it may be?
Well, I don't think it'd be the Wild West, because if you pull back the curtain, all these banks, basically, you're going to see what they're doing. You're actually going to get a chance to look, because right now, if interest rates go up, banks make money on it. But the banks can sit there and go, oh, hey, it's not our fault. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates. That's why your interest rate's going up. So they just have, the Federal Reserve is basically just there as someone to blame. The banks really control the Federal Reserve. They're just using the Federal Reserve to say, hey, it's not our fault rates are going up.
All right. So if you eliminate their fall guy, the Federal Reserve, what's to prevent the banks from manipulating the way you said? I mean, just because the curtains have been pulled back and exposed doesn't mean they can do a damn thing about it. Does it?
Well, then it brings in the fear that if people can actually see what the banks are doing, then they'll sit back and go, oh, we got to kind of calm down, because we don't want to tick off too many voters, because voters will go and vote and get Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders all fired up, and they'll pass some really strict banking regulations.
Well, I mean, that's assuming that our politicians are not indebted to the banks and the big corporations from whom they get their campaign finance money. So, what makes you think that the politicians, from public pressure, would really do anything about it, anything of note, or just, more lip service?
Well, that brings back, some politicians try to do their best. One of the things they've tried to eliminate for years is what's called carried interest. It's a tax loophole that makes billionaires in the hedge fund and private equity world. I remember back here when they was trying to do the Build Back Better thing, Bernie Sanders tried to get it added to the bill. And I think, if you arc it out, I think he said, I'm going to get carried interest repealed. I think he said that at 10 o'clock, he's adding that to the bill. By 10:30, it was stripped out of the bill.
Well, this makes my point, doesn't it? That, the politicians are going to, either they won't be willing or they won't be able to curb any of the abuses of the banking system if they go to the Wild West when we eliminate the Fed.
Correct. There's, what we're talking about is probably more pipe dreams. In reality, it will never come to that, because the banks, the hedge funds, the billionaires have so much money. They will never allow politicians to do what's in the best interest of the country.
So therefore, we're stuck either way, either with or without the Federal Reserve. Correct.
Correct. You're not going to be able to change it. So to summarize our entire conversation tonight, it's really just wishful thinking.
We can't do a darn thing about it.
Yeah.
So, it's going to continue with or without the Federal Reserve, all these abuses.
Yeah.
Rack?
Well, I kind of agree that there's not much we're going to do about it now. We're heading for a fall. We're going to fall. I mean, at some point, this whole thing's going to collapse. I think that's kind of what's already kind of happening in the world already now. But if we're talking wishful thinking, we should never have gotten the Fed in here to begin with. It was snuck in. Who was it? G. Edward Griffin, The Creature of Jekyll Island, was a book written by G. Edward Griffin, explaining how the Fed got in. And basically what happened was, during Christmas vacation, when all of Congress was kind of away and only a little select group remained, the ones that are in the know and that wanted it, they took a vote to allow the Fed in. And that was just a sneaky way of getting the Fed in. It was contrived that way.
Okay, but let's recall some of the history, what led up to the calls for a Federal Reserve. To finance the Revolutionary War, the government issued what was called Continentals. That was fiat currency issued by the new country's government. And what they did back then is what we're saying is still going on now, where they just overprint the money, and that caused inflation. And that led to the first calls for a central bank. Mark, go into the history of that. The first one was under Madison, James Madison, who was Secretary of the Treasury one time, in order to prevent that kind of inflation and other bad effects on the economy. He called for the creation of the first national bank of the United States, correct?
Correct. And just kind of a side note, real fast, I want to jump on. I was looking up the name, make sure I had it right. Paul Warburg was the second highest ranking person in the Federal Reserve. He was nominated in 1913, and he was the second most powerful person. What's interesting is he was a German-born banker. His family owned the Warburg-Pincus banking system in Germany, which was one of the largest banking empires in Europe. Now, he was the second most powerful person in the Federal Reserve right when World War I started. Now, you control interest rates, you could cause a lot of pain for the US military machine if you try to raise interest rates. But yet, on the other hand here, your family owns one of the largest banking systems in the United States. Kind of a conflict of interest, but in the end, Warburg did what was in the best interest of America, even though he was an American citizen. So you have to ask the question, what was more important than the banking system in Germany that his family owned? I think Paul Warburg's family owned stock in the Federal Reserve, and they knew it was much, much more valuable to make sure the United States and the Federal Reserve stayed intact than the little bitty banking system they had in Europe.
Yeah, so again, it boiled down to profit and to the self-interest of his family, because they were getting more juice out of the U.S. than Germany. So again, it all comes down to that. It's all business, nothing
Correct.
personal, just business.
It's really business.
Not exactly, Larry. You said that the government issued that fiat currency.
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, they did.
But that's not the way it is now. The Federal Reserve has nothing to do with the American government. The Federal
Right.
Reserve is a private entity. You might as well go to McDonald's and get your money that way or something.
Right. But again, either way, it ends in disaster. It ends in.
No, when you pay back yourself, even with the interest, if you want to do it that way, and people have done their own personal loans that way out of their 401ks, then you're paying yourself back interest. However, if you're paying a private entity interest, that interest is going elsewhere. That's no longer your money.
Yeah. So what's your solution? What's your solution?
Well, it should have never started in the first place. Still, I don't have a solution,
Yeah.
but ending the Fed would be a way to do it. How to end the Fed is a different story.
All right. Let's say we end the Fed. Then what? The banks are going to be more benevolent than the Fed has been.
Well, I think the bigger question here comes back to who stock was issued in the Federal Reserve. Somebody has voting power to sit there at board meetings and say, this is what we want the Federal Reserve to do. I want to know who owns that stock and what they get to say. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 specifically says the owners of the stock their names cannot be revealed. I want to know why that is.
Well, you would seem to be arguing then to not eliminate the Federal Reserve, but reform it.
I want the books open. I want to see what really goes on behind the closed doors. I want to know who owns stock in the Federal Reserve. Was it Paul Warburg, who was a German citizen? Did he own stock in it? Is that why he thought the stock was more valuable than his banking empire? The Rockefellers, a lot of people think the Rockefellers made their money in oil. That's incorrect. The Rockefellers were the founders of Chase Manhattan Bank.
Yeah.
They made their money in the banking system.
Well, again, that gets back to my argument that you eliminate the Federal Reserve or reform it, you pull the curtain back, we find out, let's say, how allegedly corrupt it is. So then what? Then what do we do?
How are you going to pull the curtain back when it's a private entity? Greenspan was interviewed one time, and he was asked something along those lines, and he goes, no group oversees the Federal Reserve. No group can oversee the Federal. I don't know his exact quote, but something to that effect.
Yeah, they don't want people coming in to look at the books. Why is that?
But what I'm saying is, let's say somehow we're able to pull the curtain back. We could look at the books, we could see what's really going on. Then what?
Well, then you start arresting people in the Federal Reserve for corruption. Let's not forget the first central bank and the second central bank of the United States. The reason why they didn't get their charters approved by the president was because of the corruption inside the first two central banks.
Yeah,
if the first two central banks did it, why not the third?
So let's say we start arresting people in the Federal Reserve. Then do we keep a reformed, cleaned up Federal Reserve, or do we dump it?
You need to bring people in to basically fix all the problems that the Federal Reserve has created.
All right, so you're saying keep the Federal Reserve, just reform it.
I don't believe it can still remain an outside entity. This has to be a United States thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. It needs to be. The Federal Reserve needs to be highly regulated.
But keep the Federal Reserve, but with regulations and with reform.
Well, if you reform it, then it's no longer the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, as we know, it would have to end, and it would have to become a new entity within the government.
All right, so some other regulatory body,
Yep.
separate from the U.S. government as the Fed is now.
Well, this is the problem. If you create a central bank that is part of the U.S. government, the U.S. Constitution says the only official currency is that of coin. The currency has to be coined. That's why the Federal Reserve exists, so it can bypass the Constitution and it can print money out of thin air.
Although I'm not in favor of constitutional amendments, that constitutional amendments are being kicked around for all sorts of goofy reasons nowadays. Maybe a constitutional amendment to take care of that financial situation would be the best maneuver, not Second Amendment and First Amendment.
And there's all kinds of things in the Constitution that gets, just that people just ignore. Let's not forget, the Constitution originally said you could only vote if you were a landowner. Well, I can't find anywhere in the history books where that got removed.
Yeah, but when they say it could only be coin, was that a general term for any kind of currency, or did it have to be physical metal coin?
It had to be physical. It had to be physical coins. That's why they originally went to the actual paper currency. That was why the gold notes and the silver notes, because if you had $1, if you had a $1 bill, a gold certificate in your pocket, that $1 bill, you could go to the bank and you exchange it for $1 worth of physical gold. So you could not print more money than what you had in gold in store.
But therefore, the Constitution would allow paper money if it's backed by gold.
Correct. The way they got around that was the gold and the money was basically one and the same. It was just a different way to carry it around. But then thanks to the Federal Reserve in 1933, they took us off the gold standard.
Yeah, and why did that occur?
So that because used to you could only print $1, or let's say you could only print $1 million if you had $1 million worth of gold in your reserve to match it up to. By taking it off the gold standard, now you could print unlimited amounts of money. You can print 2, 3, 10, 20, $100 million because you didn't have to have gold in reserve to back it.
The Federal Reserve came in under the administration of Woodrow Wilson in 1913. And Rack, you're saying that Wilson himself had second thoughts about it, and he expressed it in his writings.
Yes, yeah, I'm gonna get that and say I have a question to ask Mark. Why did FDR mandate that all the gold be turned in throughout the whole country?
Because during the Great Depression, people were hitting such a panic button because the dollar now was no longer backed by gold. It was just nothing more than paper. People started hitting the panic button saying, hey, I've got this paper that the government's printing. We're in the Great Depression. I don't know what this paper is going to be worth in another, 30 days, 90 days, a year. So they started, when all that paper money they had, they started going and buying gold, and the US dollar started losing its value because nobody wanted to hold paper money that was a fiat. And so because kind of like Bitcoin today, people were putting their money in gold. They made the gold illegal. They gave you the money back, the fiat currency, in exchange for it, and confiscated your gold. So now you were forced to spend the fiat currency whether you wanted to or not.
Well, was that actually enforced? I mean, how did they know what people had, how much gold?
They threatened them $10,000 fine if you didn't turn it in.
Well, yeah, and plus people that didn't have it, you go to the store and you want to buy something with gold. Well, you start trying to exchange gold over or something, or go to a bank or something. The bank was like, oh, hey, you're not supposed to have that gold, and they call the money cops.
Yeah. So, Rack, you were saying, we were talking about Woodrow Wilson having second thoughts.
Right. Let me share my screen. Let me know when you see it.
It's not up there, but I'll throw. That's how the gold got into Fort Knox. That's all the gold that was confiscated under FDR.
Yeah, I don't know if our audience could read that clearly. Maybe you could read it for us, Rack.
Yeah, let me see if I can boost it. These are both quotes by Woodrow Wilson.
And these occurred what, after he left office?
No, right after the Federal Reserve, right here. Federal Reserve Act. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, but I mean, when did he have the second thoughts expressed? While he was still president or after he left office?
I don't know. I don't know. You have to look up the quotes and find the dates on them yourself. All right. So quotes from Wilson regarding the Federal Reserve and people behind the scenes of it. I'm a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all of our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Woodrow Wilson. And it goes towards the Federal Reserve that way. Another quote by him also. Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it.
So, AKA, is that the New World Order that you
Yes.
that you talk about quite a bit?
Yeah, that'll be reference to them. Yes.
So, Mark, is the New World Order actually behind the Federal Reserve?
No, it's just a bunch of old rich guys wanting to get a little bit richer.
And those old rich guys wanting to get real, that's what I call the New World Order.
All right, so it's semantics there again. All right, so where does this leave us? I mean, it sounds like it's a pit that we can't get out of. It's a dilemma, and there is no fix that's possible. So therefore, assuming that, and I think we all pretty much agree, you know, it's going to be near impossible to fix this. Where is all this leading us, and how soon are we going to be in real dire circumstances? Mark?
We're getting there right now. Go ahead, Mark.
We're quickly approaching that. I mean, the U.S. government owes over $30 trillion in debt. The interest payments alone on that are just getting out of control. And to give you kind of an idea of what $1 trillion really is, 1 trillion seconds ago, cavemen were drawing on walls. It equates 1 trillion seconds ago equates to about 28,000 years. So, I mean, we're kind of locked into where at some point it just has to collapse. I just don't see how you can just print unlimited amounts of money. I mean, it's like you can't run up a credit card bill forever, you know.
And after it collapses, is this going to be global, or will China come out on top?
If I had to guess, when China looks at a problem, they look at a problem how to solve it over decades, not how to solve it over months, which is what the United States does. The United States tries to solve problems on a monthly basis. China tries to solve a problem on a decade basis.
So the U.S. economy goes down. Do we drag all nations, including China, with it, or does China emerge triumphant?
I think China will go down with the United States, but nowhere near to the same level. The United States will fall, 100 stories. China might fall, 10 or 15 stories, but they'll be in a lot better shape when they actually hit the ground.
So when the debris clears, the dust settles, and there's a rebuilding or reemergence, who emerges on top?
I think China will end up being the big dog at the end of the day, which that's probably still another 20 or 30 years down the road, but we're quickly approaching it.
I mean, to me, it's obvious. We're kind of shifting topics now, but it's related. China is going for world dominance to displace the U.S., and what they're doing is they're buying their way to dominance. With all these deals that they've given to our politicians, our big corporations, they've got them. So in order to make that upfront money, Americans are selling out their own country, is the way I see it.
Exactly right. I couldn't agree with you more.
Correct.
Well, I mentioned this in another video once, that there's basically two Americas. And I don't know if I explained it good enough. The America, when I say America, is the ideal America, the Bill of Rights, free speech, Second Amendment, etc. No entanglements into foreign affairs type thing. the ideal of America. That's great as far as I'm concerned. But there's a second America. It's not really America, but they masquerade as America. That's the New World Order. That's the men that Wilson is afraid of and talking about. And they masquerade as America. So when you see America's military going over to Iran, Iraq, whatever, it's not really serving the American people, which is what the government's supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's not that way when we're getting all these little wars everywhere else. These little wars are helping the money men, the international bankers, the New World Order. They're trying to put their grips on the world. Everybody wants to control the world, yet it doesn't seem like anybody notices that. People think that just because the countries have been around for when they were alive, that the countries have always been that way, they're going to remain that way, and nobody's trying to be like a Genghis Khan anymore. But everybody's trying to be like a Genghis Khan, China being one of them. And so is the New World Order. The New World Order wants to dominate the world. China might be a little cog. It might be messing up the picture a little bit for them. Because I think they have their own aspirations of world domination and control. So we got big players playing against each other, and American people are caught right in the middle.
Well, we'll have to end this session on another dire note about the future of America and our own lives, but we will be keeping track. And as I've said at the beginning of this podcast, the Federal Reserve is set to announce another interest rate hike this week, as much as 1 percentage point, which doesn't seem like much. But Mark, why would that be significant, even if it's only 3/4 of a percentage point, which they're also talking about? Either way, why is that such a big deal? 1%?
Well, it's 1% would be a big deal because you'd have to go back to the 1970s to find the Federal Reserve to have done an interest rate hike that big. But the big thing here is inflation rates running at 9.1%. The Fed funds rate's currently at 1.7. So you can raise it 100 points or 200 points. It doesn't do any good because the inflation rate is so much higher. The inflation rate's already doing the job of the Fed funds rate. And as Martin Feldman, one of the greatest economists of all time, said, the only way you can get inflation down is you have to get the Fed funds rate above it. So I think the Fed's going to have to keep on raising rates until they get either the Fed funds rate above the inflation rate, or they drive up interest rates enough to create a recession, which enough people lose their jobs, they stop spending. That will make the inflation rate come down to the Fed funds rate.
Which is, a very dire way to fix things, make the patient even sicker, and hopefully a recovery ahead. So so you're talking about the possibility of these interest rates really going up and up and up.
Correct. And the inflation rate and the Fed funds rate will meet somewhere in the middle. But right now, I think the Fed's goal is to create a man-made recession, not a natural recession, a man-made by raising interest rates so much that it actually creates a recession. Give you a perfect example. The economic data that's been coming out, the economy, the first quarter GDP came in negative. Economists expect second quarter GDP numbers to be negative as well, which is the official definition of a recession. And yet the Federal Reserve still wants to raise interest rates at least 75 basis points this week.
Wow, which is
let me ask Mark a question before we end. Mark, Ron Paul in his little bit younger days spearheaded an end Fed movement. Did he actually have a plan?
I don't think so. I mean, a lot of people talk about ending stuff, but it didn't get any traction. So I don't think he came up with a plan beyond just saying, let's end it.
All right, well, we'll end this right now. And thanks once again for being with us. Mark Hollingsworth of Vera Global Capital Wealth Management, and Rack of the Rack Attack Gamer YouTube channel. And all of you out there, we'll see you soon again, possibly this week after the interest rate is announced or on some other timely topic. Thanks, everybody.